Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest this week is Reverb.com founder and CEO, David Kalt. First of all, do you know about TikTok? TikTok.com, the website that's really, really big with tweens and teens. And this is all over the world. This is a company that's owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. And TikTok is based in Los Angeles, but it has a Chinese counterpart called Douyin. This is all about short-form video and live streaming. And these streams are really short. They're between 3 and 15 seconds, or you can loop them between 3 and 60 seconds. So it's so huge that there are 500 million users. There are 1 billion app downloads so far. This app has topped the iTunes App Store for more than a year. Yeah, you probably don't know about it. You probably haven't heard about it unless you have kids. That being said, in the United States, there's only about 9% of the total users, so it's not as popular as you might think here yet. That being said, it's really growing all over the world. Now, here's the thing. It's mostly for kids to dance and to sing against tracks or lip sync. And it turns out, what do they use? They use hit music, and mostly from the major labels. So the major labels are pretty upset because what's happening is they're not getting paid enough, or at least they don't feel that they're getting paid enough. Now, TikTok is coming back at them and they're saying, well, wait a second, these are only short little pieces. And not only that, it's not like users can go and select the song just based on the song. No, it's about the performance. It's about the user-generated content. So now we're in a big war, and the major labels are threatening with pulling their catalogs. So we'll see what happens here. This should be interesting because this is exploding. If you don't know about this app, go check it out. It's not something for anybody over about the age of 19, but that being said, it's huge right now and it's getting bigger. And who knows, this may be the next new big social platform. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. Don't forget about my online courses on mixing, production, branding, and music business success at BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com. Also, get an expert analysis and objective opinion of your songs and mixes as a member of my Hitmakers Club. Go to hitmakersclub.com to learn more. Now, are you a guitar or bass player that sings in a band? So in other words, you're playing guitar and bass and you're singing at the same time on stage. I used to do it. Boy, if I had to do it now, I'd have a hard time. But that being said, I just read this great article on Music Radar. If you're not hip to musicradar.com, go check it out. It's an English site, but they have some great material on there all the time. And what I just read was something by a singing coach named Peter Strobel, and he's the singing coach of the Stars. Among others have been Eddie and Wolfgang Van Halen. Anyway, he has a number of different suggestions for you if you are a singing guitar and bass player. And one of the big things is to integrate your singing with your instrument. So in other words, if you're practicing your singing, you should have your instrument with you and you should be practicing playing and singing at the same time. Usually what we do is we separate those, and then it's a little bit harder to put it together later. But he suggests that this is actually part of your routine if you're going to be singing and playing at the same time. If you don't integrate that, in fact, you won't be breathing properly. So speaking of that, he suggests that mic position is really important. So we all know what Lemmy looks like, right? On stage with the microphone way above him and him singing up into it. Apparently that's really bad. And instead what you should do is have the mic so you're looking down it. You look down the barrel of the mic so you can see the floor or audience 6 to 8 feet away. And that's the proper mic position in order to breathe properly. Now, posture is also important, apparently, because you have a 7 to 10 pound instrument around your neck, which is the equivalent of a gallon of water. Just imagine going to the store and getting a gallon of water and having it attached to a clothesline around your neck. Well, one of the big problems here is your posture is extremely important, because if you're leaning forward, the instrument feels heavier than it is because it's suspended in midair, and you can't breathe properly as a result. So your posture is really important, and a lot of that depends on where the mic is positioned. Here's something I thought was very interesting. There's no correct way to scream. You just have to accept the fact that you're damaging your voice one way or the other. There's no safe way to sing metal. He also says that those sprays and tea and honey and all those things the singers usually use don't really help. And in fact, it might make you feel good, but really the only thing that helps is warming up properly, doing your exercises, and practicing good posture and good breathing. If you do all those things, you shouldn't have a problem singing for long periods of time. I've seen this for myself, as a matter of fact. I've seen singers that would blow themselves out in no time. They'd be great, but they'd only be great for a short period of time. When, on the other hand, you have some that, in fact, are a little trained, and they could just go all day and all night with no problem. So I encourage you, if you're a guitar or bass player that sings, go and read this article by Peter Strobel on Music Radar. It's really great, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. My guest today is David Kalt, who launched the super popular gear site Reverb.com in 2013 after growing frustrated with the process of buying and selling guitars on eBay. To get started, David raised more than $47 million in funding from investors like Cheap Trick's Rick Nielsen and country star Brad Paisley, to tech stars like Eric Ries and Mac Levchin. Since then, Reverb has sold more than $1 billion worth of new and used instruments on the platform. In that time, David has worked with artists ranging from Foo Fighters Dave Grohl to Green Day's Billie Joe Armstrong to get gear into the hands of fans. In the interview, we talked about how he made the pivot from being a studio engineer to the business world, integrating Reverb with local music stores, an overview of Reverb's customers and gear, and much, much more. I spoke with David via phone from his home in Chicago. You were an engineer, a recording engineer first, right?
That's my core. It was my core passion. I grew up in the 70s listening to, classic rock from Zeppelin. Actually, my peak years were more like Clash and Police and, reggae, Bob Marley and Chicago blues. I wanted to produce records. And so I went out to LA while still in college. I spent some time at the Sunset Sound Factory over on Selma and Vine.
Yeah.
And a little bit of time over on Sunset, at Sunset Sound. And then I moved back to Chicago, and I worked in a studio called Chicago Tracks Recording. It was known for early house music, and then also Al Jorgensen Ministry. The band Ministry was a house band, and I did a lot of jingle work. After doing that for 2 years, I came to the conclusion I wasn't very good at it, and I wasn't going to be able to make a living doing it. And I really pivoted into a career in software and technology.
Okay, so you came to that conclusion. That's sometimes very painful when that happens.
Yeah.
I've done it several times in my career where I've pivoted, and that's one of the reasons why I'm talking to you right now, because it was a result of a pivot. How long did it take you to get going in the business world then? Because sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. So how did that happen?
I thought you wanted to talk about how I realized I wasn't going to be a great recording engineer.
Well, that's good too. Yeah, sure. We can go there.
Because as I'm sort of reliving it, I remember sitting in sessions. I remember being an assistant engineer and then kind of being at the helm for some of my own sessions. I remember watching the engineers that I was admiring, and I just watched that level of detail of really just EQing a kick drum or, really dialing in that vocal mic. And I realized I didn't have that attention to detail. While I love music and I could appreciate the Steely Dan recordings of the 70s, the obsessiveness to do another track and another track and another track and dialing. I realized I just didn't have that. I didn't have it. And I still had an appreciation for how great those phenomenal recordings can be when you do have that. But I didn't have that obsessiveness. And when I realized that, I realized I would be good with it. I'd be good with this dream that I had for, let's say, 5 or 7 years of my teen years and early 20s, that I was good with it. So it was actually a relatively easy pivot. It wasn't something that I held on to as like an extreme hobby that I needed to fulfill. I found my outlet in music. Now, the interesting thing is I've built my whole career around correlations between music, finance, and coding. And there's this theme of just mathematical problem solving, creating puzzles that I really see. And, not all people in finance have it, and not all coders are musicians, and not all musicians are good at coding. But I've seen that those three themes, music, finance, and coding, in my life have been very helpful. So it almost like was an evolution of the sort of joy I got out of music. I was able to translate that into learning to code and then building businesses and even in the world of finance and marketplace world.
It's interesting you should say that, because I've noticed that on another level, where just having a musical background and being good at that translates in some way to something else. And the one thing that comes to mind especially is video editing, where there's so many editors that are musicians that just know, they can feel where the tempo, the pulse is, and they naturally go there, where people that don't have that, they struggle to find it. So, I mean, that's just one area I can think of, but it just, music gives you a discipline that's transferable to other places. I don't think people understand that or realize it.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And you can apply those passions and that discipline for music. And like as a musician who listens to music, you have an appreciation for the art. And as a business person who uses music for inspiration, I have an appreciation for the power of music in all of our lives. So it's cool stuff.
So your first software company was what? Client Base? Is that it?
Yeah. The product was called Client Base. This is in the 90s. It was in the travel industry. And it was like what today we would call a CRM, customer relationship management. It was a basic customer database platform for marketing, like American Express Travel, and all these big travel companies would use my software to get airline reservation information about customers, and then to be able to market them trips and vacations. This is like early internet, early email, a lot of still direct mail. And that was my product in sort of 93. I ended up selling the company in 1998.
And how did Reverb come about? And I can see now that already there's some correlation between Reverb and what you just did there in Client Base.
Yeah. After Client Base, then I left the travel world and I got into the world of trading, financial markets, particularly options trading. Options trading is a unique thing because it's this like very math puzzle oriented things where it's not like a zero sum game. There's lots of different variations on how people can invest and hedge and do different things. And I was very curious about that. It's just like, it's that same obsessiveness about making music where there's a level of complexity there. And what I did is the theme between my businesses is usually it starts with a pain point. So here I was, after I sold my first business, I had a little bit of money and I started to dabble in the markets, and I was using Charles Schwab. As I was trying to trade options, doing that, I was experiencing a lot of pain. And when you experience pain, it usually forces entrepreneurs to say, well, what am I going to do about it? Next thing I know, a year or two later, me and a couple of partners, we started an online brokerage firm that ultimately was sold to Schwab 10 years later. We took it public, called Options Express. That basically was my frustration of how to build a better experience for people that wanted to trade stocks and options. So that was what actually gave me the opportunity to then leave that world of finance, which I actually enjoyed. I had a great career. I did extremely well for myself, but I also loved building product. I loved solving that pain point. And then I said, I'm going to get into trading It just happens to be guitars and instruments. And I'm going to do that through a retail business. So I bought the Chicago Music Exchange. And through that, it wasn't that I experienced the pain until I was a couple of years into it. And I really started to experience the pain, not just personally, but from a lot of other peer musicians and dealers in the industry of buying and selling musical equipment. And that was the genesis for Reverb back in 2013.
So you already had the skills to put that together.
Yeah.
So that makes it easier. But that being said, one of the hardest things when you're doing a new business, and I always think this is a problem with entrepreneurs, is they think about how to develop a product and they forget they have to market it.
Yeah.
So you have to let people know that it's there. What did you do to actually get that in front of people?
That's a really good question. Part of the secret sauce with Reverb was having this relationship with this retail business gave me real insights into both the challenges and the opportunities of buying and selling, let's just say guitars for simplicity, even though Reverb sells much more than guitars, is where are the pain points? So there were a couple pain points. One, eBay being around for around 15 years at the time and had been really a dominant player in musical instruments in the early 2000s as eBay grew. It was a big category for them. And they hadn't really kept up with the vertical or giving it any special attention. So the way I like to market is I like to assess the current environment and figure out where those pain points are and build a product that just brings a smile to people's face, right? So Reverb from the beginning, I really felt like I was addressing some of the key areas. So it was a platform for musicians by musicians. The inventory, because of my relationship with Chicago Music Exchange, and I had this other business, I could set a really high bar in terms of standards of what it meant to photograph, what it meant to describe your listing, what it meant to get a return. And by having that high bar, it made it so that other sellers and other dealers, and we were really able to get the cream of the crop in the beginning and a really quality, affordable, reasonably priced inventory, which automatically started through Google and search and spending money on Google search, allowed us to get to buyers because we were really deliberate about the inventory and really deliberate about how it was presented and how it was ultimately transacted.
I'll tell you how I found out about Reverb, and it's very much what you're just talking about now. I would do a search for whatever, 57 Strat. For whatever reason, I need a picture. And I started to see these pictures pop up, reverb.com, and they were beautiful pictures. There were wonderful examples of the particular version that I was looking for. And it was over and over and over. It's like all these great photos are coming from one place. And that's what really got my attention. And still, I love going on Reverb just to look at the pictures. It's like, okay, what kind of old gear that I haven't seen before or haven't thought about in years is going to pop up, and there's going to be a beautiful example of it. So it worked. It worked for me.
And the other element that we ultimately added that made us very distinct from eBay, Craigslist, Sweetwater, any of the other places where musicians go is we invested heavily in content, both pricing data, gear videos, demos, instructional video. We figured out how to weave that into the shopping experience so that we were at both educating and inspiring people about gear, even if they weren't ready to purchase, kind of helping whet their appetite, get them excited, be a resource for them, and let them know that when they were ready, that Reverb had the selection, Reverb had interesting inventory. The other thing that we focused on is I realized owning a guitar store that if I just had all the new Fenders and Gibsons and Martins and Ludwig drum sets, I didn't look that different than a Guitar Center. It's that used inventory that gets people excited and come back to the store and looking for something maybe they grew up playing, something one of their bandmates had, or something that has some nostalgia about the past. It doesn't just need to be vintage. I mean, it could be a Stevie Ray Vaughan reissue from 2003. Whatever it is, the idea of that hunt and that discovery, I learned that in the store experience. And I, as a traveling business person for the last 30 years, any city I was in, I would always go to the guitar stores. And I realized if I could create that experience online, that discovery of helping you find that unique, special thing, I could build a really thriving business around that. And I realized that the other thing I want to really emphasize, which I think is a secret sauce that we're working on, is that as a dealer, I realized that musicians were kind of getting screwed, and that the difference between the wholesale and the retail pricing on used was pretty dramatic. And people would go back to their dealer, they'd sell it, they'd get 50 cents on the dollar, and the dealer would mark it up 100 points. The dealer would sit and look at it on a hook or on a shelf for 3 months, ultimately discount it 20%. And it was just such a poor use of capital. So when we launched Reverb, I really worked hard with both Chicago Music Exchange and other dealers and trying to get people to basically offer musicians more than they would typically offer them in a store setting. So what we've done over time, now that we're 6 years into it, we have dramatically improved the price that a musician gets for their gear when they sell it directly on Reverb and what they're able to pay for that next purchase. And we've made that bid-ask spread, because I come from the trading finance world, we've made that really tight. So in essence, we're trying to remove the risk, whether you're buying a U87 microphone or that Stevie Ray Vaughan reissued guitar on Reverb. The price is pretty darn close to the difference between if you're a buyer or a seller is pretty darn tight. And that means that if you don't love it, you can go sell it on Reverb again. And there's a buyer ready to happen. And we're still in that process in Europe and Japan and trying to democratize the pricing. As we do that, used gear will compete with new gear in ways that it just hasn't before. And that's what I'm most excited about all the 50 years of instruments that have been created from US to Japan, great crafted instruments and electronics and microphones and pro audio and keyboards and synthesizers and drum machines, and bringing all those products fairly priced to musicians. That really excites us.
Now, you have a unique perspective because you're part of online sales of instruments and the music store experience that you had. That being said, music stores seem to be in trouble these days. Brick and mortar stores seem to be in trouble. And I look at them and I think, okay, I can get why some of them are in trouble. I can get why the ones that are surviving. But that being said, it saddens me that the local music store isn't there the way it used to be, because that was an integral experience in growing up and actually getting into the music business and learning about the music business by going to your local music store, even when you couldn't buy anything. And now I see the same people doing that, going to Reverb.
I know.
They're not going to buy something, but they're going to go and they're going to look around, but it's still the local music store is in trouble. So how do you feel about that? What do you see as the problem with the local music store?
A big part of Reverb's emphasis actually is the local music store. So we really feel like we're partners with, thousands of people who make a living buying and selling new and used instruments. And they sell on Reverb. We keep our fees really low to make it very affordable. So what we've tried to do is we actually partner with dealers and we help them do what we call omni-channel. Like the music shop that's going to be around in the next 5 years has to be good at selling online and offline. They have to be able to, like, for instance, what Reverb helps a lot of dealers do, it helps them buy used inventory from their customers that they want to go sell them new inventory. They can move that inventory in hours or days on Reverb as opposed to it sitting on a hook. So we become a resource for them to be able to be more aggressive on being able to offer their customers buy-ins. We also allow them to compete with Guitar Center and Sweetwater and Musician's Friend by selling online and doing it really easy and affordable. We have tons of integrations. We have a product called Reverb Sites, which helps them build their own website. So the idea that you're just a music store and you're waiting for walk-in business, yes, that's a dying breed, and those stores will not exist. But the idea that there's a local store in St. Louis and Chicago and Detroit and Tulsa and Memphis, that there'll be plenty of them, and they just have to be really good at basically servicing their customers online. Now, the trick with being a good online music shop is the same skills it takes to be a good physical one. You have to provide real-time customer support. You have to be able to answer people's questions online, just as if they're in the store. You can't wait 24 hours. You have to be able to ship things and take returns and do all the things that you do in a store. You just have to learn to do that online. And trust me, customers are very, very savvy. And there are lots and lots of dealers that are stepping up to the plate and servicing both the online and the physical customer and doing it in a hybrid way. There are plenty of thriving stores that have adopted this dual strategy. So I'm encouraged. I'm very encouraged by that.
I have a customer relations story that I think you'll appreciate. When I was a young man playing in a band in Pennsylvania, we would go to 48th Street in New York.
Of course, yeah.
The mecca of guitar stores, of music stores.
Yeah.
And I remember buying an old Kahn strobe tuner from Manny's.
Uh-huh.
And it broke. So about 6 weeks later, I went back, and Henry himself, Henry Goldstein, came and got it and treated me like I was Jimi Hendrix, even though I was a kid from the Styx.
Yeah.
He treated me so well that I remember till this day. And I'll tell you, it's one of those things where it's like, this guy didn't have to. He didn't have to go out of his way, and he did. And it's one of those examples of customer service. It's like it left a lasting impression on me.
And think of all the aspiring. I mean, I've become pretty friendly with Rick Nielsen. I mean, his father owned a shop in Rockford. He grew up in the business. Every time Rick goes into a store, all he thinks about is his family's livelihood, like running it. And you've got a lot of examples of that. I think Ben Harper's mom owns a store. Like, you can see people that have made it, and their ties to either their first music store or some family. Joe Bonamassa, he's got like family in guitar business. Everyone has a story about their first music store experience, their first purchase, and it's really cool. It's part of the folklore, but it's not dead. I'll tell you, there's a band, a very popular band, played the United Center in Chicago last week, Mumford and Sons.
Oh, sure.
They're as global as you can get. They've got to be going to music stores in every city, but they come to Chicago Music Exchange every time they're in town. They spend hours there. They walk out with gear. And I could tell you thousands and thousands of stories of young musicians and old musicians alike that still have an appreciation for going in and talking to other musicians and falling in love with instruments through that experience. So I'm encouraged that's here to stay.
Who is the average buyer on Reverb?
The average buyer, we've got a pretty large customer base, so it's hard to sort of identify a persona. But I'll share with you some high level data. So our average order is around $300. So that means we're selling a lot of $80 pedals and a lot of $2,000 Taylor guitars as well, and a lot of chord keyboards and a lot of microphones, AKG microphones, and all of the above. But in general, probably around 65% of our customers are what we call in the guitar category, guitar, bass, acoustic, amplifier, or effects pedals. 60 to 65% of our orders and revenue comes from that segment. So if I had to generalize, I would say there's a little bit of a bias towards a guitarist. Guitarists are generally buying multiple instruments. But when we talk about genre, that's where we're really focused on diversity and not, it started off as more of a classic rock blues type customer base. But when I see, and all the, going to more of a metal shredder base, all the way to bluegrass, we have classical musicians, we have a lot of brass and jazz stuff. So it's our goal is to be as diverse as possible. Our goal is to grow our female base as well. It's still heavily male dominated, probably in the high 70%, but we see a huge growth segment in female artists, and we're really excited to be a leader in encouraging more women to be less intimidated. I'd say your typical music store can be very intimidating to an inexperienced or newer musician or a female musician, and we want to make Reverb really inclusive across a wide range of future musicians.
I think Fender put out a survey, or the results of a survey recently, that said that 50% of their recent buyers were female.
Isn't that incredible?
50%.
Yeah.
Now, most of them were acoustic guitar, but nonetheless, there were still customers. So that's great.
It's really great. Yeah. We're really excited about that as well.
Yeah. What's the most expensive item that was ever bought or sold?
We've had a couple Les Paul bursts. The holy grail vintage guitars is 58, 59, 60 Gibson Les Paul. So we've had actually probably a dozen or so bursts sell in the $200,000 to $250,000 range. Now we cap our fee at $350. So we're not really incented like an auction house to, drive up the price on that. The other typical thing of Reverb is probably around 30% of our transactions are negotiated, just like you would in a store. Huh. There's a whole offer system and messaging going back and forth, and people are haggling just like that, like they did on 48th Street.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what makes Reverb attractive to people. So when we get to these high end, let's call it $250,000 Les Pauls, I think that's the top of the market.
Okay. I looked at Reverb sites before, and I thought that was really cool. It was very easy to traverse, and I could see how it would be easy for a music store, especially one that's not particularly online savvy, to get up and running. So that's great. How long has that been going?
That's been a little over a year and a half now. We've got, hundreds, actually thousands of customers using it, but actively probably more like 300 to 400 active sites that are running on Reverb sites as part of their Reverb experience. So yeah, we're really committed to that and helping grow those businesses. And spending a lot of money building a custom website can be very, very costly for a typical dealer. There's another element to our business, which is direct to consumer. So when we think of the business, you and I, we could talk about Fender and Gibson and Martin and Ludwig and Roland. But the cool, most interesting segment is boutique makers, people, small pedal manufacturers, small bass manufacturers, people that are making electronic modular racks and things like that, and even boutique microphone makers. So what Reverb does is we allow some of these vendors that would never get a chance at NAMM to get into thousands of dealer shops. We allow them to actually sell direct. So there's this whole maker audience of people that are making products, and Reverb is an outlet for them to actually reach customers without having to actually involve a dealer.
I know there's a lot of politics involved in that in terms of if you do have dealers and then you're trying to go direct. Do you have a policy against that? Just out of curiosity.
The suppliers that support their dealers don't typically sell on Reverb direct. That's just not good business for them.
Yeah.
But a lot of them do sell direct. Like, for instance, Fender does sell direct, and they have thousands of dealers that carry their product. In the last 2-3 years, that's become more of a trend of the larger dealers that are still selling direct. They do a very small percentage of their business direct. So it's kind of silly at times, but there is that segment. We don't really police it. If someone wants to sell direct, or if it's a dealer, it's, we're a free market, and we're not there to uphold a dealer agreement, but the supplier is in control of the situation. The extent that we police it is that if you were selling an authorized new Gibson guitar, you need to be an authorized Gibson dealer. We don't want anyone selling something that's not truly an authorized dealer. If you're selling a used Gibson guitar, you don't have to have any credentials of that nature.
Sure. Where is Reverb going in the future?
A lot of our growth is really focused on this, on the international opportunities. As I was mentioning to you about the liquidity, about what's the fair price for a Taylor 814 from 2012. The way you get to a fair price is what's the fair price in Tokyo, and what's the fair price in Los Angeles, and what's the fair price in Berlin. We really see the opportunity to move instruments globally in ways that they're not doing right now. So we've got offices in Amsterdam. We've got around 15 people over in Europe helping spread the word. We just launched offices in Japan, and we're working on expanding our capabilities there, taking our content and making sure that it's both personalized and localized in all these markets. So we still see a large opportunity to continue doing what we're doing. We'll do almost 700 million in sales this year on the Reverb platform. And we see Reverb growing to well over 2 billion over the next 3 to 4 years. Just doing exactly what we're doing, just interacting with more musicians in more markets.
That's pretty awesome. David, what's one thing that people don't know about Reverb that you wish they knew?
What's one thing? One thing is that we have, you probably expect this, but you wouldn't know, but like behind the curtain, I mean, we have a culture of people that are really, really passionate and excited about this mission of making the world a more musical place. Because at the end of the day, what Reverb's comprised of is we have software engineers, we have marketing experts and content people, and we have customer service. So we're helping people, we're resolving problems, we're building trust with our customers, we're building really good software, world-class software for our marketplace platform. But at the end of the day, people come to work in a workforce of millennials that, really are driven on purpose. And the purpose that drives us most is that when two musicians exchange an instrument over the internet, that we're making the world more musical and that we're hopefully bringing smiles to people's faces. And those people are going out and making music for other people or playing in a band and, making the world more musical, a little bit more happy, dealing with some of the, negativity in our daily Twitter feed. We feel good about our mission.
Last question, David. You're distinctly qualified, I think, to answer this. What's the best piece of business advice that either someone imparted to you or you learned along the way?
Well, that's really easy, actually. It's not the idea. I talk to a lot of people, friends and peers who are stuck in a career that they're not thrilled with or happy, and they have great ideas. I had that idea. If I only had this idea, what's this idea? And I haven't built my business on super unique ideas. I built 3-4 businesses on execution, day in, day out, having clarity. And when I talk about execution a lot, and I really believe in it, it's having a visualization of where you want to be, both in life and in business. But let's just focus on business, is being able to visualize. And when I visualize, I can visualize what the website looks like. I can visualize the office. I can visualize what it means to have 5 customer service reps, or what does it mean to have 50? What does it mean to have an Amsterdam office? How are they talking to each other? The ability to visualize what your business looks like in 2020, 21, 22 is, to me, the only way you can achieve that. Visualization is a very, very powerful tool. I spend a lot of time visualizing where we want the business and the product to be, and then executing on that and sharing that visualization with as many people as possible. And the more people that can see it, feel it, experience it, the easier it is to execute on it. So execution and visualization.
Very cool. Thanks, David. This has been great. You can check out some fine used gear and learn more about David and Reverb at reverb.com. That's reverb.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyoinnercircle.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to bobbyoinnercircle.com, or find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, Google Play, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, and now Radio Public. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyowinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.